Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Gillian Skeffington. I'm the Associate Dean Academic in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. I was reflecting that on the land acknowledgement that we are gathered here to talk about stories on land that has been listening to stories for a very long time. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone tonight to the 4th annual Monica Miller Memorial Lecture. Monica Miller was a broadcaster with CKUA Radio and a passionate supporter of the arts. This lecture series honors her love of literature, providing an opportunity for us to amplify and celebrate women's voices. Each year, this lecture series brings a talented author to MacEwan for a public lecture, followed by a masterclass for students in our creative writing programs. Tonight, we are beyond pleased to welcome distinguished author Lorna Crozier as our guest and lecturer for the evening. The lecture this evening will be hosted and moderated by Edmonton's own Alice Major. Alice Major has published 12 collections of poetry, 2 novels for young adults, and an award-winning collection of essays about poetry and science. She is a past president of the Writers Guild of Alberta and the League of Canadian Poets, and former chair of the Edmonton Arts Council. From 2005 to 2007, Alice was the City of Edmonton's first poet laureate. During her tenure, she founded the Edmonton Poetry Festival. Her latest poetry collection is Knife on Snow, published by Turnstone. Please join me in welcoming Alice Major and Lorna Crozier.
Thank you so much, Jill. And thank you to all the people at MacEwan who have done so much to put this Monica Miller lecture series together on our annual calendars. Before we start, just a note about how the evening is going to unfold. After Lorna's lecture, I have the pleasure of having a bit of conversation with her. And then we will have questions from the audience. So if you have anything that you have been burning to ask her in the past or something that comes up, please make a note of it and we will hopefully have time for all the questions. Then there'll be some more brief wrap-up remarks and finally a reception and the book signing out in the atrium. And now I get to introduce our speaker. Although in some ways that seems like a singularly unnecessary task, because I don't think anyone here doesn't know who Lorna Crozier is. And I certainly don't need to list off all the awards and honors she has received over the past decades, all the honorary doctorates, literary prizes, lifetime achievement awards, Order of Canada pins. In fact, I think she must be running out of wall space to put them all up. But I do want to pay tribute to Lorna Crozier for the role she has played for writers and readers in Canada, and elsewhere, of course, but she is ours. She has been an exemplar, inspiration, and mentor for so many people here. And especially, I think, to women writers, and those of us writing from this Western Canadian place. Her poems have given us a kind of permission to write with honesty, playfulness, much sensuality. There's a whole lot of us who, whenever we hear the title of the sequence, Sex Lives of Vegetables, we'll look sideways at each other and say, oh yeah, the carrots. But that sequence was actually published in a 1985 book, one of her earlier ones, The Garden Going On But Without Us. And since then, in the 4 decades, she has published many, many more books. I kept losing track of or losing count of how many, because there are also, besides the collections of new poems and selected poems, there are memoirs and collaborative works with photographers and artists and books for young readers. But all of them exercise her characteristic capacity to blend irony and mysticism, down-to-earth soil and wildly imagined story, approachability and reserve. Her work is full of the mystery in life and landscape and the intertwining of love and grief. So I'm very happy to welcome our special guest to Treaty 6 territory and Amiskwachie Waskaikan, and even happier to turn the microphone over to her. Thank you.
It's a lovely introduction. Thanks so much, Alice. I forget how we first met. We'll have to talk about that later, but I feel like Alice has been part of my poetry life for many decades now. I want to particularly welcome Monica Miller's husband, Ken, and their son, Evan, who are here tonight, very, very special guests of this evening. Most of you know that Monica Miller established this series with her family to, quote, amplify and draw attention to women's voices in literature. How great is that? I'd like to suggest that these voices go back a long, long way, and at least if you grew up like me in a Judeo-Christian culture, it all begins with Eve. Most of you know the story of Eden, where shortly after creation, God asked Adam, not Eve, and not the two of them together, to name the animals. I'm going to give you my take on what happened next, an alternate version that doesn't appear in Genesis. It's a prose poem called Adam Not. After he'd come in from the garden and she'd written down at his instruction his name for every living thing, as if she was his Miss Friday, not his every day of the bleeding week, he went bonkers, charged around the house and shouted, table, lamp, bed, etc., tossing nouns like stones into the quiet, the air slapping against the walls like sour water. Table, she knew, wanted to be called come sit around. Lamp, morning's memory. Bed, dream ship. And sometimes in a different mood, storm maker. She didn't correct him, but went outside, settling in the shade of the forbidden tree where, obedient to his God, he never went. Anyway, busy with what he liked to call his lexicography, he wouldn't give her a second thought. For as long as it took, as the sun slid down the sky, she'd be left alone. The first to arrive was the shelled thing that slimed across the stones on its own excrescences. Its horns, thin as stamens, waved in the fading light, sketching the signature it went by among its kin. Its silent vowels said much about its yearning and its tender nature, sensitive to salt and touch. Next, the red, long-tailed one appeared from the tall grasses, his nose coursing the air, his ears twitching. The animal stayed near until the word for him and his kind sounded inside the woman's brain, the several syllables as clear as notes played on a glass piano. In that moment of discovery, as she mouthed his name, he held her in the wilds of his eyes, then vanished into shadow. One by one, the others came. I will not call you horse, she said, mountain goat or wolf or raven. Each grew brighter when she let them be, flew higher, ran faster, horns and feathers gilded, though the sun had set. Their chosen allophones and homophones swarmed together, dancing like the quick ideas of fireflies among the shadows of the hedges. Last to arrive was the animal she saw most often. Though he curled beside her every night, a creature of whiskers, claws, and purrs, he didn't disclose what, far from human ear and eye, he called himself. Left alone, the others gone to caves and nests, burrows and peaks, the two of them, anonymous beneath the stars, became the no one silence the grass lisps with its many tongues, green and everlasting, for winter in paradise had yet to come. So the Eve, I imagine, it begins her storytelling as a deep and inspired listening, respecting every other being newly created, different but equal to herself. Of course, her openness to their own naming is a metaphor for equality and for the dangers of human hegemony, the destruction it's responsible for in our world. But I offer her as a foremother and precursor for women who followed. Writers like George Meredith and Virginia Woolf, Carol Shields and S.A. Adujan, among the long line of luminaries Monica Miller wished to honor. Monica died in 2019, the same year as my husband, the writer Patrick Lane. Her self-written obituary suggested that those who want to donate in her memory could contribute to this lecture series and to an award for creative writing students at Grant MacEwan. You'll hear more about that later. Or they could buy a tree and plant it, as she said, where it is most needed. That's pretty classy. I'd like to walk with her among those trees, now 6 years into their growing, and talk to her about her passion for writing and for music, something she was able to hone and pass on in her career at CKUA. She begins her obituary with a quote from one of my favorite singers and songwriters, John Prine. "Life is a blessing, it's a delicatessen." You gotta love that rhyme. I've called my talk 7 Poeticisms, and each section begins in a nod to Monica with lines from John Prine. It's one way to express my appreciation for her legacy and to thank her wherever she is listening to her favorite music for the honor of my being here today. Poeticism 1, there's 2 of everything, but only 1 of me. In cleaning out Patrick's office after his death, I came upon a poster from September the 24th, 1974. It announced a poetry reading in Vancouver at the Steelworkers Hall. The night of the reading, the hall was packed, union members crowding into the room to hear what was being billed as poets of the working class: Patrick Lane, Pete Trower, David Day, and Pat Lowther. Patrick and Pat Lowther were good friends. They both had young families at the time and kids in tow. They'd meet up once a month or so at his place or hers with a few other friends, poems tucked in their back pockets. Her husband, Roy, who fancied himself a poet too, was often at these gatherings. He was always put out, Patrick said, when his wife's poems garnered praise and his didn't. And because he considered himself a leftist, he raged when he wasn't invited to read at the union event. Patrick knew his friend had been particularly excited to be part of the roster that night, as he was himself. That's why he felt unsettled and disturbed when she didn't show up. Many of you know how this story ends. Pat Lowther's body was found weeks later in a creek near her house. Her husband murdered her the night of the reading with a hammer. He was found guilty and later died in prison. I bring her up because her strong political female voice was brutally silenced by a man who thought he had more right to speak than she did. Nothing can compensate for the loss of her life, but her poems have survived in several books, including a scholarly edition of her collected works. And to celebrate her work and keep her story alive, the League of Canadian Poets established the Pat Lowther Award for the best book of poetry by a Canadian woman. I've been blessed to receive it 3 times, most recently in 2015. Of the honors that have come my way, it carries the most meaning for me. Her story is a grim sister's tale, sinister and mythic, and all too real. Especially in poetry, silence is a partner in the writing. It's there in the spaces between the end of a line and the right-hand margin, in the gap between stanzas, and it surrounds each word like a mist where is hidden every word that isn't chosen. But there is, of course, a negative silencing, a dismissal of women's concerns and passions, of women's bodies, of the often different ways they shape their thoughts and feelings into art and send them out into the world. The silencing of Pat Lowther is the shameful apogee of this. If you are a woman poet in Canada, your words can't help but touch hers and echo back in a long poetic refrain. As successors, we who are here now carry her and the other wise and wounded ones forward as acts of acknowledgement, connection, and hard-earned grace. Poeticism 2. No matter how hard I tried, the years just flowed by like a broken down dam. Pat Lowther died at 40. I'm almost twice that age, my body leaning awkwardly toward the frightening round number of 80. I know I'm lucky to be close to this milestone, but I can assure you I never imagined getting here. Or if I did, I saw a dried-up, stooped woman in lisle stockings, a floral-patterned house dress, and sensible, though small-heeled shoes, like my 2 grandmothers. One of them on the Crozier side of the family even had a condition called milk leg. Her calves in those tight brown stockings sloshed like milk in a pail when she walked. I thought she deserved it. For no reason my father could fathom, she'd cut him out of her will and left the farm to his younger brother. My father never got over it. The American poet George Oppen exclaimed, "Old age comes upon you suddenly. What a strange thing to happen to a little boy." What a strange thing to happen to a little girl, I might add. I started writing and publishing in my mid-20s. Doing the math, I'm somewhat surprised to admit that I've been on the poetry train, or should I say the poetry bicycle, for 50 years. If I use as a starting point the first poem that I wrote as a child, it adds up to 70 years of writing. That's rather shocking, isn't it? My grade 1 teacher kicked off everything for me when she assigned as homework, with no specific guidelines, us to write a poem and bring it into the class the next morning. I can't quote the one I came up with in its entirety, you'll be relieved to hear, but I do remember what it was about. My dad was a slippery character who often stepped outside the lines of the legal and ethical. One of his early jobs after he'd lost the farm and moved his family to the city was driving an oil delivery truck for the Swift Current Co-op. Without his boss's knowledge, and I have no idea how he pulled it off, he traded a tank of oil for a purebred toy Pomeranian pup. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I lay on my belly on the worn linoleum in front of the wood stove and watched her small pink tongue lapping milk. My parents were used to farm dogs who lived on scraps. Every Sunday, our dog was treated to the bones left over from our ritual meal of roasted chicken. The problem with owning a small purebred was that their innards were too delicate to digest this treat. It took months before they figured out that her fall into sickness every Monday came from the bones splintering in her gut. Sure, I was losing her. I used my fear to initiate my first poem. The refrain was, "And we shall meet in heaven by and by." My teacher and classmates commiserated with me about the loss of my dog. I didn't dare tell them she hadn't died. In fact, she lived till she was 15. I accepted their sympathy and praise, and with that deception and trickery, I became a poet. What I learned in that moment has never left me. You write about what you care most fiercely, and you lie, if necessary, to get at the truth. Oh, little girl, I've never been smarter than you. Poeticism 3. Time don't fly, it bounds and leaps, and a country band that plays for keeps, they play it so slow. Doris Lessing, that brilliant, cranky truth-teller who died at 94, chose to reveal what she called the great secret that all old people share. Are you ready for it? In her words, you haven't really changed in 70 or 80 years. Your body changes, but you don't change at all. You don't change at all? Weren't you supposed to? Weren't you supposed to become less silly, less motivated by primitive desires? Weren't you supposed to become not only more confident, but learned and sagacious? At 77, I remain bumbling and hesitant, less wise than I believed I was in my 30s or 40s or 50s, way less wise than in my 20s. But there's some relief in that. Patrick and I decided around the same time that we didn't know anything. Admitting our ignorance allowed us to blunder forward in our quotidian tasks and in our writing. Perhaps a combination of doubt and ambiguity is the greatest gift age gives to a writer. A banker wouldn't want it, or a surgeon, but an artist? Poems and novels and stories come from unknowing, not certainty. They are full of stumbles and stutterings, of getting close to the thing but wanting to get closer. If you know how to solve the problem before you start, then push harder and find a task worthy of your world-weary, word-weary intelligence. You enter the new work as you would an anonymous city, without a signpost on the darkened streets, aware that you'll get lost, none of your book learning leading you forward or through. It's not wisdom that gives you energy and edge, that lets you find the almost pre-linguistic tongue that poems demand. Poetry is the mind at play. It is the primal, sensuous mind sounding its way into meaning. Speak slowly, with many pauses in between. It's those pauses that are doing the work. The one who cannot hear can hear them. Poeticism 4. It don't make much sense that common sense don't make no sense no more. Admitting that human beings ain't as smart as we think we are, and that most of us don't get smarter, allows us to value other kinds of shrewdness. the thinking our bodies do, for instance, even when they're sitting still, or the keenness of the images that dwell in the shadows of our consciousness and which, when we raise our pens, stir the surface like Sylvia Plath's terrible fish rising in a mirror. Poetry is as much about capturing, in the fragile net called language, the unseen as the seen. Where the two perspectives intersect and dance together, the poem or story appears. The proper humility also opens up the opportunity to lean toward other creatures and learn from them in openness and wonder. Every being, from horse to starfish, has a fine and bright intelligence no lesser than our own. In her treatise on birds, Candace Savage quotes Reverend Henry Ward Beecher from the mid-1800s. He said, "If men had wings and bore black feathers, few of them would be clever enough to be crows." Poetry, in its origins in shamanistic spells and rituals, has always known the mental quickness of other species and the link between us and them. Indigenous peoples have always known that. It has taken the rest of the human tribe longer to get there, but they will if they follow the poets. In a collection of essays called Dream of the Marsh Wren, the poet Patty Ann Rogers writes, "I believe each non-human life is an expression somehow of an aspect of myself, if I were only clever enough to decipher all of those meanings. The brook trout is the sleek-scaled and graceful aspect of myself that knows how to survive underwater. The octopus, the means by which I can discover the sea world in a supple 8-way simultaneity. The bat and the coyote allow me to touch the moon in gestures I could never achieve alone. My garden on Vancouver Island is graced with the pond that is the heart of the yard, and the pond's heart is 2 turtles who've been there for over 20 years. Red-eared sliders the size of generous dinner plates, they seem blind to the food I toss in the water, only able to see the floating pellets if they come up from underneath. As the goldfish rush in to devour their chow, even as it rains down on the reptiles' noses, more than one visitor has laughed and called them dumb. They are as smart as a turtle, I reply, as smart as the turtle needs to be." Poeticism 5. How the hell can a person go to work in the morning, then come home in the evening with nothing to say? Being wordsmiths, Patrick and I talked a lot, read out loud to each other from our favorite books, and shared our work. But when the crunch came, when he fell ill with no diagnosis or cure in sight, we had little to say. He tried to comfort me with the words of the 14th century mystic Julia of Norwich. "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." He wanted me to take this literally, and so I did. He would get well. It was only as we moved closer to the end that I heard them as they were meant to be understood. All shall be well, no matter what happens, no matter what the despair, joy, sorrow. For if one is a believer, as this mystic was, nothing can keep you from God's grace. We had plenty of time, including hours in the hospital with me sitting by his bed, to talk about what was to come, but we didn't. As I'd done for most of my life, however, I took refuge in writing. I went to my desk with the view of the pond outside, the turtles skimming the water, and wrote about our lives together. I included the stories of the 5 cats who'd lived with us throughout the years. Their biographies I read to Patrick as he lay in bed, but I didn't read the parts about his illness, about my fear of losing him. I talked about it only over his mute body, stretched out under a white sheet in the hospital's emergency room. Let there be angels. William Blake heard angels singing. I wonder what you heard at the end. The trauma doctor said, talk to him if you want, he can hear you. This was before he turned off the machine. I talked to you between kisses. I kissed your mouth, your eyes, lowered the sheet and kissed your chest and belly. I took your long feet in my hands and kissed your toes, and the pale soles mapped with where you'd walked for almost 80 years. I took the palms of your hands and laid them on me, the last time they would touch me. I held each hand between mine the way I'd hold a broken bird. I talked. I didn't say anything that would surprise you, but my mouth was busy. Maybe you weren't pleased. You wanted more. In times that mattered, we always tried to say something the other didn't know. Poeticism 6. Just give me one thing that I can hold on to. Writing, as it had done for most of my life, showed me again that words, in spite of their limitations, and we all know about that, are capable of containing all the love, sorrow, and joy a body can hold. During the launch of the memoir I just finished after Patrick died, interviewers asked if writing had been a consolation. No, I said. His death had hit me hard. Nothing could console me. But there was a fierce and unexpected solace that came from the 26 letters of the alphabet and what, in my writing of this book, they'd been able to do. For me, no matter what the memoir's quality or lack thereof, the writing of it proved it was possible for even an emotion as complicated and devastating as grief to find phrases and sounds to echo it. Grief could lay itself out on a page like a body on a sheet, like a wingless angel leaving its shape in the snow. Poeticism 7. Take it back, take it back. Oh no, you can't say that. After I finished my memoir, before I started on my own poems that became the book after that, my next task was to delve into the verses Patrick had left behind. The last few months of his life, he'd given me a sheaf of typed pages in a file folder saying, I think there's a small book here. Tell me what you think. I felt hesitant to read them. What if I didn't like them? We never lied to each other about our writing, and I wasn't about to start. I got out a pen, ready to make notes on the pages, and sat down to read. Thank God the poems were so good. I wrote wonderful in the margins of most of the pages and then made a few suggestions. Patrick didn't have the time to go back to the drafts I edited. The file remained unopened on his desk. It took over a year for me to face them again. I delayed because I knew that to edit them properly, I'd have to run them by him. I'd have to conjure him up to be by my side, to channel him out of the wound of loss, to summon his ghostly presence. Would have been impossible to do any sooner. Poetry has the amazing ability to stop time in spite of light shifting in the sky and the night coming on. The face of the clock goes blank in poetry's presence, and at least for the moment of the poem's speaking, everything is once again luminously alive. Even elegies bring the dead to the threshold of words which are made of breath, and the dead breathe them in. Turning Patrick's poems into a publishable book was the most difficult writing task I've ever faced. We'd edited each other's work in the past, sure, and most of the time we listened to the other's advice, but the final decision always remained with the writer. As I worked on his last words to the world, I talked to him out loud, saying things like, I hope you're okay if I take this word out, this stanza. Is it all right if I make this clearer? Is this the right poem to end the book? Did he answer me? I don't know, but my gathering into my heart and mind his deathless intelligence gave me the courage to do the job. I had lived in and around his powerful voice for 40 years. In some ways, it had become part of me. There could have been no better editor for this task, yet at the same time, I felt a tremendous responsibility because he'd never want lesser work to appear in a book under his name. The last thing he'd want from me would be pity, sentimentality, or blurred judgment. In his writing, as in the rest of his life, he was a man of great integrity. 2 ways to keep on going. Soon it will be over. Find the herb that grows on stone and brew it for a tea. It will make your heart turn hard. Watch how water falls without breaking. Watch how snow falls without breaking. Watch how your cut hair falls to the floor and you lift your head. Your friends say, how young you look. Look how light falls upon you and doesn't break. Credo. Oodles of light, what a beautiful sight. Both of God's eyes are shining tonight. The editing of Patrick's poems became a conversation, our final dialogue about poetry. His voice on the pages stretching across the months of his absence, the rhythms he heard in his breath and blood entering my body as I sat at my computer with the stark beauty he created in the last days of his life. When I was finished with his poems and could read them not as the final words of my lover, but as literature, it became obvious that they'd been written by a man who knew he was dying. Or if the man didn't know that, the poems did. Poems so often see and intuit things that have yet to register in our conscious minds. The knowing that is poetry is deep and old and borderless. It is a dark, cold stream made of many, many voices that flows beneath our feet and has been there before our birth and will remain after we are gone. When we write, we send a taproot down into it and draw it into an almost pre-linguistic run of words. We taste its iron and salt, centuries old, but alive now and now and now on our tongues. We taste the knowing that is Margaret Atwood and Pat Lowther and Bronwyn Wallace and Louise Bernice Half. And we taste the knowing that is Monica Miller, who wanted to shine a light on such women's voices. I began with the poem about naming. I'm going to end with a poem about naming, a new one, and it's a little lighter than the first one. It's a dialogue between Google and me about poetry. Questions and answers found when you Google the word poetry. How do you identify the audience of a poem? Whom a writer wishes would read their work, whom a writer knows will be reading their work, whom a writer wants their work to appeal to. The bird outside my window, song sparrow, pine siskin, doesn't know I've paused in my tasks to listen. The mating season past, winter coming on, he sings because he has a song. What are people who like poetry called? A person who loves poems is called an aesthete or logophile or poetophile. Personally, I call them Anne-Marie, Melanie, Brad. I call them Ella, Susan, Chris, Jackie, Tom, and Norman the dog, who stretches his deaf ears as high as he can when I read out loud in the middle of the trail the poem showing him the way he wants to go. What do we call a female poet? Most female poets prefer to be called poets. Some want to be called wind that crosses water, stinkhorn mushroom, buffalo rolling in muddy wallow. Some want to be called abundance. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.